Hello, my name is Nicks, and we're going to be working through this disability workshop today. Let's get started. Who am I? My name is Nicks. I'm an autistic individual. That's why I'm doing the topic of disability. Because I'm autistic, I feel more qualified to talk about the autistic experience, so we're not going to be talking a lot about other disabilities. We'll be dabbling in some, but not a lot. There's me and my service dog in our senior photos. He's so cute. The topic's connection to my future career is I want to become a behavioral technician when I turn 18, that is, because you have to be 18 to get the certification. I'm planning on doing that until I graduate college, and then once I graduate, I'll just have the special education degree, and I'll be set for life. Hello? There we go. The objective for you is by the end of today, you will hopefully understand the basics of autism spectrum disorder and its relation to literacy. We're going to touch on a couple other disabilities as they're applicable, like I said, but mainly we're focusing on autism. After this presentation, you're hopefully going to be answering these following questions. There's five of them. I want you to read them over on your own. I'll give you a couple seconds to do that. All right. Our foundational understandings are super important. So, to be literate in the 21st century, a person must be willing to constantly learn about and adapt to many different areas of life, subjects, and environments. Now, the reason I highlighted adapt. That is super important because I have a quote down here. Change, especially unexpected change, can be extremely stressful for children with autism spectrum disorder. Now, if you have autism spectrum disorder and you already have a hard time with change, that means you're going to have a hard time with digital literacy as a result. So, if the adaptation piece is super hard for autistic people, that means all autistic people across the board, especially children, are going to have a hard time being digitally literate in their future or even in the present. Next, we're going to talk about Sia's Music. Music is a 2021 movie that is designed, or that was directed by Sia, for the autistic community, as she says. There's a lot of debate going around between whether it was intentionally for the autistic community or whether it was just for money. But I'm going to leave that out for now because that is not what we're talking about. The whole point is who is being silenced. That's the autistic community. Now, I'm going to jump up here to the top and we're going to talk about this quote from one of the readings from the critical illiteracy or the critical literacy readings. So, understanding the relationship between representation and reality. That is what Luke defines critical illiteracy or literacy as. Now, here's why we're talking about critical illiteracy and why I keep accidentally saying it. She has said she tried to work with an autistic actor who found filming too stressful. She immediately defaulted to a neurotypical star afterwards. Now, neurotypical is is a fancy way to say not disabled. I think neurotypical, I cannot guarantee this because my knowledge is limited, but I want to say that applies to only cognitive disabilities and physical disabilities have different labels that they like to use. Now, the musical segments are filled with strobing lights, colors, loud sounds, quick camera movements, and overstimulating everything. If we jump back one or two slides, we're going to see that environment piece of the digital literacy. Now, if autistic people already have a hard time with digital literacy, and part of that digital literacy is adapting to environments, then autistic people are not going to be able to watch this movie if that is what it is filled with. Another thing that's super important to note is that about 1 in 4 autistic people have epilepsy, so the movie can cause seizures with the strobing lights, loud sounds, quick movements, stuff like that. So it's uncomfortable for autistic people who don't have epilepsy, and people who do have epilepsy and autism can't even watch the movie. That is super interesting because this movie was specifically meant for the autistic community, as Sia states. Here we have a clip of Maddie, who is Sia's goddaughter, and the interesting thing is that Sia cast her goddaughter, knowing she did not have a disability and was not autistic. Here's a screenshot from the movie, and we can see that it is pretty negative and stereotypical connotation of disabled people and especially autism. Let's move on. Next, we're talking about digital media literacy. Digital media literacy is the ability to use information and communication technologies to find, evaluate, create, and communicate information. This requires requiring both cognitive and technical skills. That whole thing is a fancy way of saying you use technology to communicate information. I don't know why they made it that long, but that's okay. Now, we're going to talk about Autism Speaks. Autism Speaks is a huge corporation, especially in America, and they claim to be supporting the autistic community. The interesting thing about this is that the autistic community has directly rejected them so many times because Autism Speaks, as we can see by this infographic, is not is not designated to helping autistic families, autistic people, and they do not use representation either, which is super important in literacy. So you can look over this infographic. I'll give you a little bit to do that yourself, and then we'll come back and move on to the next slide. All right, let's move on. So next we're talking about media literacy. These are the pieces where we're going to talk about other disabilities because it makes me sad talking about negative um media stereotypes of disabled people. So we're instead going to talk about positive things. Now, effective media literacy education also involves a strong focus on civic engagement and creation, connecting people with the tools to make their voices and perspectives heard. That's really great. I love that. And in addition to that, I got two highly represented uh movies, TV shows, documentaries. I think this one's a movie and this one's a Netflix series, I want to say. But the interesting thing about these is that Deaf U is created, one of the directors is actually deaf, and it's about a group of college students who are deaf and just how they navigate their lives. I want to say it's a Netflix docu-series, but I thought that was really cool, and I love having representation in the directors, and I just wanted to share that. This next one, I'm not going to say the title because I don't feel comfortable saying that word, but I do know that this one was nominated for a Sundance Film Festival award, and as far as I'm aware, it went really well, and this has a really positive representation of disabled people, especially with physical disabilities. When we talk about disabilities in school, we often talk about cognitive, and I think it's really important that we bring in those physical disabilities too. Let's move on. Next, we're talking about cultural literacy. Now, to understand how Americans view disabled voices, we're going to think back on the last few slides we look at. Here are my key points I want to look at. First, we live in a free country. That can be good, that can be bad. As we saw with the last slide, that means we get super positive representation from people who are just like us. That's great, we love that. But the downside of that free country is that we have movies like Sia's Music, and that is just negative representation that outraged a lot of people. So I think if you look at it from a free country's perspective in our American culture, it can either go really good, really bad, sometimes in the middle, but I like to think of it as normally it's polar. Now, the government is not necessarily the same as the citizens. I wanted to make a point of that because we're going to think about the wage gap really quick. The government that makes the laws in America is not the same as the citizens. In terms of the people who work in the government generally are very wealthy. And a lot of American citizens that we think of, or that especially people from outside of America think of, have a lot of money. But from my perspective, at least, I feel like a lot of the American citizens that I meet on a daily basis are so close to losing their house, losing their job. And that's something important that I wanted to mention in there. Because the government that makes the laws is not made for the same people as the citizens. The next one is more money, more power, more publicity, and more traction. I wrote that down because, well, I wanted to reference Sia's music again. More money. She is a highly famous influencer. She had fame before that movie came out. So she had money to begin with. That means she automatically had more power. She had more followers. She had more people to share this product towards. Next, she has more publicity because not only does she have more money and more power, but when you combine them, you get more publicity. And as a result, more traction. More people find out about it. Now, if we look back at the Netflix series and the movie that I looked at from the Sundance Film Festival, they started with less money. And that means that they can't even climb this ladder at all if you don't have the money. That is also why I mentioned the government. I just thought about those kind of connected. But I think it was really interesting because a lot of people know about Sia's music, but not a lot of people know about those films. And I think especially having positive representation is really good. And we want to see that a lot more. Next, I was going to write down or talk about America in relation to other countries. I found this really good resource that talks about Japan and the resources Japan has available to disabled individuals. Here's a quote from one of the individuals who is living in Japan and is disabled. They said, "We still have segregation between people with disabilities and without disabilities in education, employment, and community living." I thought that was really interesting because compared to America, Japan is not doing too hot with disability and access. So, I think we as Americans, especially in modern day, tend to think of America as, oh, I want to leave. I don't think that is necessarily the truth or that's what's best. Because I myself thought, oh, I want to leave America too. When you really put it into perspective and look at the other countries around you that you have options of leaving to, I feel as if the free country, even though it is very polar and there can be some really good outcomes and some really bad outcomes, in my opinion, I would rather stay here. We're gonna move on now. Next, we're gonna talk about multimodal literacies. This one's my favorite. So Google did partner with the Stanford Neurodiversity Project. Their goals including establishing a culture that values neurodivergence or disabilities and empowering talented neurodivergent people through training and work opportunities. The reason I wrote this down is because about a year ago, when I was in my student teaching course or my cadet teaching for high school, we watched a video that basically shared how Google was specifically seeking out autistic individuals because of their memorization. It is highly known, and there have been studies that prove that autistic individuals have really good photographic memories. And that makes employees or employers like Google and Stanford seek them out. And not only that, but they have changed the way that they do interviewing for autistic people to be seeked out because Google is so desperate for those people. Coding requires a lot of visual memory and like repetitive memory. So that's why they're seeking out autistic individuals who already have an advantage at that, which I thought was really cool and I wanted to share that. And keep going. Here are our key takeaways. Number one, listen to disabled voices. It is really hard when we all have our own opinions, we all have our own biases, and that's okay. But if you're not in the marginalized group, then don't speak for it. That's a pretty simple way to explain it. Number two, knowledge is power. The more you know, the more you can help disabled voices. The more you can speak with us instead of against us. And number three, keep fighting for what's right. Keep fighting for not only what you think is best, but what disabled people think is best for themselves. And that ties straight into knowledge is power and listen to disabled voices. I think these are super powerful key takeaways because even though they're very vague, they have a lot of power and depth within them. Not only that, but they all string together. Without one, you can't do the other.